What happens when the monster doesn't look like one, but like an angel? Not a man with rage in his eyes, but a woman always smiling and soft-spoken. This is a descent into the minds of those few whose crimes were too cold to forget. Their stories are more twisted than the most brutal headlines. Welcome to the most terrifying tales of black female serial killers. Clementine Barnabet, country, United States. Date of execution, unspecified. On February 24, 1911, the Andrus family was murdered in their home in Lafayette. The Barnabet family lived nearby, and on February 26th, Sheriff Louis Lacoste of Lafayette Parish arrested Raymond Barnabet on suspicion of the murders. A woman described as Raymond's mistress had implicated him in the crime. However, due to a lack of evidence, he was released within the week. In July, Raymond was arrested again after his daughter Clementine and his son Ferran testified against him. They claimed he came home with blood on his clothes and bragged about killing the Andrus family. Dana Porter, Raymond's partner, denied hearing any confession or seeing blood, but she confirmed that Raymond had violent tendencies and had once threatened to kill her. Two other witnesses, neighbors Adele Stevens and her mother, also said they did not see Raymond covered in blood on the night of the murders. Despite this, on October 19th, Raymond was convicted of the Andrus murders and sentenced to death by hanging. He did not react directly to the verdict, but throughout the trial he repeatedly muttered, "Goodbye and mo futu," which means "I'm done for" in Louisiana Creole. Raymond's attorneys successfully filed an appeal, arguing that he had been too drunk to defend himself in court properly. While waiting for a new trial, Raymond remained in jail. On November 27, 1911, while Raymond was still in jail, Norbert and Azema Randall and their 4 children were murdered in Lafayette. The killings were similar to the earlier murders. Clementine Barnabet lived just a few blocks away and worked as a live-in housekeeper for the Guidry family. She knew the Randalls personally. She and Azema Randall both served as deaconesses at the same church. Clementine was arrested that same day after police found blood on the back gate of the Guidry residence. A search of her bedroom uncovered more blood on an apron, a dress, and some underwear, increasing suspicion against her. A physician confirmed that the bloodstains were from a human and claimed the sample also contained brain matter. He determined that the material matched what had been found on a pillowcase at the Andrus home. At first, Clementine denied any involvement, but after undergoing a third-degree interrogation in New Orleans, she admitted to the murders. During her trial for the murders of both the Andrus and Randall families, Clementine behaved erratically, rocking back and forth in her chair and laughing. She admitted to being involved in many other cases. Clementine was accused of killing 7 families, totaling 35 people. Clementine's trial began on October 21, 1912. On October 25th, she was convicted of the murder of Azema Randall and sentenced to life in the Louisiana State Penitentiary. On July 31, 1913, she escaped from jail for a few hours but was quickly recaptured. Later, on August 28, 1923, she was released from prison after undergoing an unspecified surgical operation that officials believed had cured her. Roberta Elder, country, United States. Date of execution, unspecified. The wife of Reverend William M. Elder caused his death by poisoning him through food, and also poisoned 2 of their children. She was charged with their murders. During her trial, evidence showed that her crimes went beyond her immediate family. Authorities accused her of killing up to 13 people, including 2 former husbands, 3 of her children, a grandson, a cousin, and her mother. The killings may have started as early as 1938, but no one suspected foul play until Reverend Elder died in 1952 after eating a meal of bananas and cheese. Reverend Elder was a respected Baptist preacher in Atlanta, Georgia. 1 year before his death, his daughter Fannie Mae had died from what was believed to be pneumonia, and another daughter, Annie Pearl, had died of the same cause 2 years earlier. The same coroner who examined the daughters found Reverend Elder's death suspicious. His skin appeared ruddy, and his body was severely emaciated, raising doubts about the pneumonia diagnosis. Concerned by the number of deaths in the Elder family, the coroner tested Reverend Elder's body for arsenic poisoning, which can mimic the symptoms of pneumonia. The test confirmed the presence of arsenic. The coroner then alerted authorities about the suspicious pattern of deaths linked to the Eason Street home where the Elder family lived. Police quickly turned their attention to Reverend Elder's wife, Roberta. Roberta and William had been married for just over 2 years when he died. They lived with William's 5 children from a previous marriage, but 2 of the children died not long after moving in. William, who worked in construction, suddenly became violently ill at work after saying he had eaten bananas and cheese. Roberta called a doctor who gave him medicine and instructed the family to call if William's condition worsened. No follow-up call was made until William was already dying. His children later said they saw Roberta give him milk of magnesia to ease his symptoms. This was the same remedy she had given their sisters before they died. They eventually suspected she had used it to deliver poison. The surviving family members showed signs of arsenic exposure and received medical treatment. Investigators also discovered that Roberta had taken out life insurance policies on each of the deceased family members. Police ordered the exhumation of Annie Pearl and Fannie Mae, Reverend Elder's daughters. Tests revealed arsenic in both women's hair, which investigators considered strong enough evidence to arrest Roberta Elder. As the investigation widened, police discovered that Roberta's suspected killings dated back to 1938, beginning with the death of her common-law husband, John Woodward. Authorities identified 10 more individuals who had died under suspicious circumstances while living with Roberta. She had taken out life insurance policies on several of the deceased, with payouts ranging from $50 to $225. The most significant policies were $500 on Reverend Elder and $550 on Fannie Mae. Roberta collected the insurance money after each death. Although the case against her was based mainly on circumstantial evidence, Roberta Elder was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. She is believed to be buried in Watkinsville Cemetery under the name Roberta Elder. Her gravestone does not include a birth year and lists her death year as 1973. Frances Elaine Newton. Country, United States. Date of execution, September 14th, 2005. Frances Elaine Newton was responsible for the murder of her husband, Adrian, her son, Alton, and her daughter, Farah. She killed them on April 7th, 1987, in Texas. Adrian was 23 years old. Alton was 7, and Farah was 20 months old. Frances was almost 22 years old when she committed the murders. A court convicted her on November 17, 1987. She had shot all 3 family members in what was described as execution style. Frances said she was innocent even in her final moments. Reports said that Frances and Adrian had problems in their marriage and that Adrian struggled with substance abuse. All 3 victims were shot with a pistol that belonged to a man Frances had been seeing at the time. Frances claimed that a drug dealer killed the 3 victims. The Houston police showed evidence that Frances's husband was a drug dealer who owed money to his supplier. Frances said she was innocent from her first questioning in 1987 until her execution in 2005. The prosecutors said Frances bought life insurance policies for her husband, her daughter, and herself about 1 month before the triple murder. Each policy was worth $50,000. Frances named herself as the beneficiary of her husband's and daughter's policies. She said she forged her husband's signature to prevent him from discovering that she had saved money to pay the insurance premiums. The prosecutors used these facts to explain why she had a motive. Francis also put a paper bag with the murder weapon in a relative's home soon after the murders. On October 25, 1988, the court found Francis guilty of the murders and sentenced her to death. She spent almost 17 years on death row before the state executed her. She was executed by lethal injection on September 14, 2005. Banita Jacks, State, Columbia, date of execution unspecified. Banita Jacks was responsible for the murders of her 4 daughters, who were aged from 5 to 17 years old. She was convicted on July 29, 2009. Federal marshals discovered the girls' bodies in Banita's home in January 2008 while carrying out an eviction. Banita came to the door wearing only a white t-shirt with brown smudge marks and refused to let the marshals inside. Later, it was discovered that the brown smudge marks were dried blood. When the U.S. Marshals identified themselves, Banita tried to shut and lock the door, but Deputy U.S. Marshal Kevin Ruark stopped her by placing his boot in the door. The marshals forced their way into the dark home. Deputies Rourke and Nicholas Garrett immediately smelled an odor of rotting meat like stink bait, which they thought was rotten or spoiled food. Banita tried to slow them down as they climbed the dark staircase. When they reached the top, Ruark saw the bodies of the small children lying in the first bedroom. The bodies were placed side by side and were in terrible condition, showing advanced decomposition. The bodies of the 3 younger girls were lined up by age, each wearing a white t-shirt. Brittany's body was found in another upstairs bedroom, nude, and lying on a pillow on the floor under a white t-shirt. Medical examiners who examined the bodies determined that the 3 younger girls had been strangled and that Brittany had been stabbed repeatedly. However, because the bodies were so badly decomposed, examiners could not say for sure that the injuries caused the girls' deaths. Banita claimed that all 4 of her daughters died in their sleep, and she said she tried but failed to revive them. Banita's trial on 12 charges, including premeditated first-degree murder, felony murder, and cruelty to children for each of her 4 daughters, began on July 15, 2009, in the Superior Court of the District of Columbia. She pleaded not guilty and refused to use an insanity defense. Judge Frederick H. Weisberg found her guilty on all charges except the first-degree murder of Brittany Jacks. On December 18, 2009, after her conviction, Judge Weisberg sentenced Banita to 120 years in prison, 30 years for each murder. Priscilla Joyce Ford. Country, United States. Date of execution unspecified. In Reno, Nevada, a crowd had gathered to watch the annual Thanksgiving Day parade. Suddenly, a woman drove a Lincoln Continental onto the sidewalk next to Virginia Street and through the crowd for about 100 feet. The attack killed 6 people and injured 23 others. Police at the scene ordered the driver out of the car. She did not resist. Authorities identified her as Priscilla Joyce Ford, who had moved to Reno earlier that year. Her blood alcohol level was found to be .162, which was over the legal driving limit. Deputy District Attorney John Oakes went to the scene. He said Ford stayed remarkably calm when speaking with him. When she asked how many people she had killed, Oakes replied 5 or 6, and she responded, "Good." Another officer later reported that Ford said, "The more dead, the better," while in custody. After her arrest, authorities found that Priscilla Ford had a long history of mental illness. She had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and had shown violent behavior in the past. Over the years, she had been treated at 7 different mental health facilities before moving to Reno. She was assigned a public defender who requested a mental evaluation. On January 29, 1981, Ford was found incompetent to stand trial. She remained in custody and was sent to Lakes Crossing for mental treatment. During and after this time, she reported hearing voices from public figures like Joan Bennett Kennedy and journalist Barbara Walters. On April 29, 1981, the court ordered her to undergo treatment, including drug therapy. On August 4, 1981, she was found competent to stand trial. Ford pleaded not guilty because of insanity. Her trial lasted nearly 5 months, making it the longest in the history of Northern Nevada. The jury included 7 women and 5 men. After 13 hours of deliberation, on March 19, 1982, the jury found her guilty of 6 counts of murder and 23 counts of attempted murder. On March 28, 1982, the jury voted for the death penalty. Tonya Thomas, country, United States. Date of execution, unspecified. In the early morning of May 15, 2012, a shooting occurred in Port St. John, Florida. Tonya Thomas, age 33, called her children into their house. She was a single mother with 4 children between the ages of 12 and 17. Records showed past incidents of domestic violence, past abuse, and several police visits to the home. However, no report indicated an immediate threat. At around 3 a.m., Tonya sent a text message to a friend. "Tell my mom what happened. I want to be cremated with my children." She then used a .38 caliber revolver to shoot her children. 3 children, Joel, Jaslyn, and Jax, escaped and went to a neighbor's house. The neighbor, uncertain who the shooter was, did not open the door. Tonya walked outside and called out to 3 of them. When they returned, she shot each of them. Then she went inside and shot herself. The children were identified as Joel, age 12, Jaslyn, age 13, Jax, age 15, and Pebbles, age 17. There was no suicide note other than the text. The revolver was not registered. In the weeks before the incident, police had responded to multiple disturbances at the house. One involved a report that Jax had acted violently toward his mother. During welfare checks, all 4 children reported feeling safe. No abuse was reported at the time. Tonya Thomas had previous contact with authorities and a documented history of instability. Despite this, the killings were not predicted. The house remains quiet, but the case remains open-ended. Tonya's motive was never confirmed. Nadia Braxton, country, United States. Date of execution, unspecified. Nadia Braxton, age 29, lived in a quiet neighborhood in Kenner, near New Orleans, in a house on East Louisiana State Drive. She lived there with her 3 daughters, Kayla, age 12, Nia, a toddler, and Nyla, 6 months old. Nadia had no criminal record and no reported history of violence. Neighbors and friends described her as quiet. She often stayed home while her partner, Ronald Peters, worked in construction and plumbing. Reports state that the family faced financial problems, including repeated foreclosure actions. On July 12, 2011, a court order was filed to begin formal eviction. In the days leading up to the incident, Nadia contacted a pastor she had not spoken to in nearly 6 years. She said she felt anxious and lost. The pastor offered prayers and asked her to call anytime. On the morning of July 12th, she called, but the pastor was unavailable. He later tried to return the call, but there was no answer. That evening, Ronald Peters returned from work. He found the house silent. Upstairs, he discovered Nadia and the 3 children were deceased. Police found a firearm at the foot of the bed. It was confirmed to be a murder-suicide. Investigators found no signs of forced entry or struggle. There were no prior domestic violence reports and no police calls from the home. Nadia owned the firearm legally. The case closed without trial. No legal proceedings followed. The cause was determined to be internal distress, not reported or observed before the event. Antoinette Frank, country, United States. Date of execution, unspecified. Antoinette Frank is a former officer of the New Orleans Police Department. On March 4, 1995, she carried out an armed robbery at a Vietnamese restaurant. The robbery led to the deaths of 2 members of the Vu family and Officer Ronald A. Williams II. Frank acted with Rogers Lacaze, a known drug dealer, and her suspected lover. Frank visited Kim An, the Vietnamese restaurant, with Lacaze. She was working off-duty there as a security guard. Cho Vu was in the kitchen counting money. She came out to pay Officer Williams, who was also working as a security officer. Williams had joined the police in 1991. He was married and had 2 children. Frank and Lacaze had visited the restaurant twice earlier that night for leftover food. Chow let them out the last time, but after they left, she noticed the front door key was missing. When Frank returned a 3rd time, Chow sensed something was wrong. She hid the money in a microwave and ran back to the kitchen. Frank entered through the front door using the stolen key. She walked past Williams and pushed Chow, her brother Kwok, and another employee toward the kitchen. Williams followed, trying to understand what was happening. Lacaze shot him from behind, hitting his neck and paralyzing him. As Williams fell, Lacaze shot him in the head and back. Frank walked back to the dining area. Chow and Kwok hid inside a walk-in cooler with another worker. They did not know where their siblings Ha and Kwong were. Ha and Kwong had been cleaning the dining room when Frank entered. From inside the cooler, Chow saw Frank searching the kitchen. Then she heard more gunshots. Frank found the money in the microwave. When Kwong hesitated to give up his location, she hit him with her gun. She then shot Ha 3 times and Kwong 6 times. After Frank and Lacaze left, Chow tried to call emergency services from her phone, but had no signal. Kwok ran out the back and alerted a nearby friend who called for help. On April 28, 1995, a grand jury in Orleans Parish indicted both Frank and Lacaze. Their trials were held separately. Lacaze's trial ran from July 17th to July 21st. Judge Frank Marullo presided. Lacaze was found guilty and sentenced to death. Frank's trial began on September 5th, also before Judge Marullo. On September 12th, the jury found her guilty after 22 minutes of deliberation. The next day, they recommended the death penalty after 45 minutes. Frank was officially sentenced on October 20th, 1995. She is now on death row at the Louisiana Correctional Institute for Women in St. Gabriel. Zakieya Latrice. Country, United States. Date of execution. Zakieya Latrice was a 28-year-old mother of 4. She teamed up with 21-year-old Monifa Sanford, a woman she met through church. Together, they called themselves the Demon Assassins. They believed they were on a mission to remove evil spirits, including Latrice's children. On the night of January 16th, a neighbor noticed a child left alone in a car for almost an hour. They called emergency services. Police came but left when no one answered the door. Later that night, Latrice and Sanford believed the children were possessed. They attempted an exorcism. 1-year-old Norel Harris and 2-year-old Zakieya Latrice died. Their 5-year-old and 8-year-old siblings were stabbed but survived. The next morning, another neighbor saw a bloody knife in a car and called the police. Officers arrived and found 2 children dead, wrapped in wet blankets. The other 2 children were alive but wounded. Latrice fled out the back door but was caught quickly. Police arrested Latrice and Sanford. They were both charged with first-degree murder and attempted murder. During questioning, they claimed they were saving the children's souls. Investigators found no signs of rituals. There were no candles or symbols. Latrice had a history of mental illness. Sanford had also tried to take her own life in the past. A judge ordered mental health evaluations for both women. They were moved to a maximum security psychiatric hospital. Latrice remains in custody without bail. The surviving children were placed in care and are still recovering. The children's father and family have stayed private. Renee Denise Bowman, country, United States. Date of execution, unspecified. In September 2008, a young girl jumped from a second-floor window in Maryland. The culprit at the center was Renee Denise Bowman. She had adopted 3 children and lived in what appeared to be a typical family home, but investigators discovered that Bowman's house was not safe. In the basement freezer, police found the frozen bodies of 2 girls, Jasmine and Minute Bowman, aged 7 and 9. Bowman adopted the 3 girls through the District of Columbia's foster care system. She received over $150,000 in subsidies meant for their care. Authorities said her motive was money and control, not love. Between 2006 and 2007, while living in Rockville, Bowman killed Jasmine and Minute. She suffocated them with a pillow, wrapped their bodies in plastic, and stored them in a freezer. She moved the freezer as she relocated across Maryland, continuing to collect money as if the girls were still alive. For more than 1 year, the 3rd child, the only survivor, was locked in a room with a reverse door lock. She had to use a bucket as a toilet and was beaten with bats and shoes. In court, she called Bowman her ex-mother. She said Bowman choked her so many times she lost count. Her escape led police to uncover the full story. A former inmate said Bowman admitted to the murders. Bowman herself answered, "I did," when asked who wrapped the bodies, bagged them, and placed them in the freezer. In 2010, Renee Bowman was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She received 2 life sentences without parole and an additional 75 years. She had earlier been sentenced to 25 years for the abuse of the surviving child. Bowman remains in prison. The case led to changes in how foster care cases are handled in Washington, D.C., and raised questions about how the abuse went unnoticed. When asked why she called Bowman her ex-mother, the surviving child said, "I just don't like saying her name." Vanessa Coleman, country, United States. Date of execution, unspecified. Shannon Gale Christian, age 21, and Hugh Christopher Newsom Jr., age 23, were from Knoxville, Tennessee. On the evening of January 6, 2007, they were kidnapped during a carjacking involving Christian's vehicle. The attackers took them to a rental house where both victims were raped, tortured, and murdered. 4 men and 1 woman were later arrested, charged, and convicted. In 2007, a grand jury indicted Latalvis Darnell Cobbins, Lamarcus Duval Davidson, George Giovanni Thomas, and Vanessa Lynn Coleman for kidnapping, robbery, and murder. Vanessa Coleman admitted to being present in the house during the crimes but claimed she was being held hostage by the other defendants. However, a journal recovered after the arrests of George Thomas, Latalvis Cobbins, and Coleman raised serious doubts about her claim. An entry dated January 9th read, "Last night was one of a kind. We stayed with a crackhead that is cool as hell. It snowed a little bit, but it's already melted. Let's talk about adventures. I had one hell of an adventure. Since I've been in the Big TN, it's a crazy world these days. But I love the fun adventures and lessons that I've learned. It's going to be a long, interesting year." A forensic document examiner confirmed that the handwriting matched Coleman's. Coleman was found guilty of facilitating the crimes and sentenced to 53 years in prison. If you enjoy the way we create videos and would like us to bring more cases like this to light, please hit the like button and subscribe for more in-depth dives.